Now we have to have micro content, and that's social media, and then that's the demand, that's the beast, that's the thing we got to feed, and that destroys it. A lot of creatives that I've been watching out there are tired of having to pump out content. They're saying, I went from creating art to creating content. That's sad. But I want to talk to you about the future of podcasting, finding your niche, leaning into creativity. This is the Podcast in the Rough. Tune in every Friday for new adventurous episodes. Welcome back to another great episode of the Podcast in the Rough. I'm your host, Zebulon Thomas, and this is episode 166. This is the first episode of season 6, and I'm excited about this next season. I hope you are too. And if you're someone who's looking to, level up your podcast and think about creative ways to really make podcasting extremely fun, adventurous, and exciting, then stick with me because season 6 is going to be dedicated to really finding out what it is that we can do to take our podcast to new heights and make it more of an experience for our listeners. If you're like me, you geek out over podcast equipment, the microphones, the way it sounds, the things you can plug into your podcast, the guests you can have on your show, the places your podcast can take you, and more importantly, the adventure of podcasting. Podcasting to me is a great hybrid of all the different things that I do in my life, whether it's my business, my entrepreneurship, creative ideas, podcasting, geeking out over certain tech, new information, finding people from all over the world that I want to interview and share their story or tap into something new. It even goes beyond that. When I'm having conversations with friends or someone new that I've met and they start talking about an idea or something silly, and I go, that could be a great episode. That could be a podcast. And I want you to think about that because right here in season 6, I'm speaking to those of you who are just like me. My ideal avatar, if you will. Who is that? It's the person who wants to do anything they can to find perfection, take it to another level, push through boundaries and barricades, be super creative, change the game, and do things that many think are impossible. I've been a creative for as long as I've known, right? Like ever since I picked up a pencil to draw, ever since I started working on my bicycle, going on a little adventure in the woods, being creative with my imagination. I remember picking up a camera back in I think it was 91, 92 when I was just a kid and learning how to use this camcorder and making home videos. And I thought, this is exciting. Over the years, my creativity would just run wild until it spilled into entrepreneurship and really forming products and services and then creating a business and then organizing things and then finding more ways to lean into my creativity. And I would say as I found and developed my niche and the things that I really want to master and lean more into with my creative flow, I really picked the area of audio video, audio visual, right? I really leaned into creating things that allow me to work with sound and video and photos. And that ultimately led to me creating my ZT Films company, creating commercials and exciting videos that capture life's great moments and creative projects and short films and things like that. I also went down the route of music and I did a lot of music. I cut some albums, I did some mixes, and I love all of the things with audio as well. And then I ventured into photography and I started taking photos and I liked the style and I have a creative eye for that. And I brought it all together. I brought it all together into my ZT Films. And I share this with you because I want you to think about what it is that you can lean into to find your niche and bring all your creative flows, your creative abilities together so that you can really live in abundance with this and move in a direction you want to go and create the ideal life and do all the exciting things. And what's nice about all of these little things that you're going to be searching and leaning into and working on and trying to master and challenging yourself, podcasting fits right in the middle. Because let's just say you're not video, you're not audio, and you don't know these things. That's what I'm here to help you with, to help you find that new thing that you be creative with using these tools. But at the baseline, podcasting is about capturing the journey, the story, all the moments that you want to explain or share and keep record of that. And other people are listening and they want to see what you're doing. And you can plug in video and you can plug in all these different things to this. But at its core, it's just audio. And that's what I love about podcasting. I can sit down, I can decide if I want to do a video podcast or an audio podcast. It could be short, it could be a long podcast. There's no limits. And that's just recording. And then you can go in and then you can spend more time and edit this and make it sound good and plug in different things and get creative with it. You can also attach it to a lot of different areas of your life and your business and what's going on in the world. And it really is just a great hybrid of everything. So one of the things I want to share with you in season 6 is not just about podcasting. We've been talking about how to, podcast from start to success and monetize it and mix and master and get the right sound and settings. This season is going to be a little different. It's going to be sharing more of my entrepreneurship approach, things that you can resonate with, sharing you some ideas of my past experiences, trials and tribulations, the adventure I went on as an entrepreneur, and how that feeds into all of this, and how it can feed into what you do, and maybe help you get past those pitfalls or avoid the pitfalls altogether and just take it to another level. So this is really for those of you right now who are looking at your podcast, you already have one, and you're like, this is great, but what can I do? How do I take it to the next level? What does the next level look like for me? To really put that in perspective, I want to focus on what does the future of podcasting hold? Like, what's my prediction of podcasting? One of the biggest things that comes up when you search this or talk to some tech people or just kind of what's going around, right? Like what are people talking about? It's AI podcasting. Now, I haven't really dived into this, right? I've been kind of rebellious against AI, right? Like there's some things that I like and there's some things I don't like, but from a creative approach, I'll stay away from AI. I don't want it to artificially create things for me, right? But I am interested, and I'm going to learn a little bit more about this, and I think it would be beneficial for all of us to give some attention to what AI podcasting might look like in the future. Now, I'm not a big fan of having something create a podcast that is completely generated AI and you didn't really have anything to do with it. Like that there's no point in that. The only place where that would work is, let's just say you have zero time for podcasting. You need it, right? It's one of those things where you need to have it. It happens to be the outlet for you for marketing. Let's just say that in business. And you can't find anyone to do it. And so you just gather some reports maybe and getting the news and information out there on a grand scale that's in demand, that has to pump out content. Like maybe there. And I would never want my podcast to be subject to something like that where I have to constantly pump out content. Like doing a daily podcast is one thing, but imagine doing a podcast episode 3 times a day, every day. Unless this was my full-time thing, and even then I wouldn't want that. It sounds like it'd be watered down. It wouldn't be special. And it depends on what you're talking about. Because obviously when I go through podcasts and I listen, I do kind of like some of the news report podcasting. They're broadcasting things, and I love the way they narrate it, or they talk about it, they share the information, and that's good. And most of it's scripted and to the point. And I like the educational podcast, and I like just the down raw podcast of people sharing a conversation. I get to kind of sit in on that, right? And then I like the podcasts that are polished and they're well fine-tuned and they're put on like a great show, right? Like a talk show. And that's kind of where mine fits in. It's like I want to make my episodes and this podcast, resonate as a talk show, and it's on every Friday, right? And the quality has to be there. And so, over time, what did the next level look like for my podcast? It was like just improving the quality equipment, testing out new microphones, finding the right mic that, my voice sounds best on, and then streamlining that, and then getting mixers and finding out what you can plug into that and how to make this whole editing thing, because it goes through phases. You start off with nothing pretty much, and it's very easy to do a podcast, once you get over your nerves. And then it turns into something like, we got more editing to do. Oh, we're throwing this on top of that. Now we got music, and then we got more editing, and then we got video, which is more editing, and you got uploading in different platforms. And then it comes into now we have to have micro content, and that's social media. And then that's the demand. That's the beast. That's the thing we got to feed, and that destroys it, in my opinion. A lot of creatives that I've been watching out there are tired of having to pump out content. They're saying, I went from creating art to creating content. And I saw that the other day, and I was like, that's sad. I felt the same way. And it shouldn't be like that. Learn to create what it is that you want. This algorithm is not your friend. It can be, but it's really not your friend if you don't know how to use it, or if you think you're just going to race to the top. Everyone's trying to race to the top. Everyone's trying to get exposure and get known. But one thing that I think a majority of them are not focused on is building a community, building a relationship with whoever's watching them. Like so many people are so concerned about having huge numbers and not just maybe 2 or 3 really solid connections. I would much rather have 5 to 10 people that I'm connected with and we share a common interest, and every time I put out content, they eat it up and we communicate and have a conversation, than to have a whole bunch of followers where I pump out the content and I don't get any views, any comments, or I get a bunch of mixed comments that are mostly negative, and it's not serving the purpose that I've set this up for. So I think you have to look at that, right? If you're a creative, stay creative. Create content. Have fun with it. Don't subject yourself to having to put out so much content, right? Because you're never going to win that game. And so I bring this up because what does your podcast look like? What does the future of podcasting look like for you, for me, for just the world in general? And I think it's about focusing on the communities that we're going to build, that we want to build, the people we want to connect to. Like I want to connect to other people just like me. Right? Hopefully you're listening to this right now and you're just like me. You have all this creative energy and you want to do something with it and you want to learn and grow, and you're going to absorb as much information as you can. And if you're listening to me, then I'm excited because I've obviously did something right to build rapport with you, to get you to, look at me as someone to trust and listen to. I do have a great wealth of knowledge and experience in life and business and all this stuff that I bring to the table. And that's why I have my podcast. I'm not out here just talking. I'm sharing little bits of everything that I've done. And I do that to help you take a little bit and take it and run the ball. Like just the other day before I even recorded this episode, I sat here and I thought, almost kind of like, the what do I have to offer, right? The imposter syndrome. But it wasn't so much of like, what position do I have to be able to talk about this? I already know where I'm at with that. I was more thinking about, I don't really want to talk about things that went on in my life, because how does that really serve you? Like, what do you care, right? But then it goes back to like, that's how we learn. Like if I had something that went on that was exciting and it was something that could be duplicated and this is how I got it done, I would share it with people and it would help you. If I went through something that was horrible and it didn't work out in the business or in life and I shared it with you, you're either going to relate to it or you're going to learn what to look out for. And so like season 6, I was telling myself too, like how much about podcasting can I teach? And it really is endless. I could keep going with this and I want to, but I want to make it more exciting. I missed 3 podcast episodes in the past couple weeks. A lot of things going on in my life, been really busy, which is a good thing. But I've been telling everybody, listen, no matter how busy life gets, you can knock out a podcast. Just make it 2 minutes to say hi. Make it 5 minutes and packed with the best stuff. Script it out, right? And I did a few scripts and I've recorded a few. When I went back, I was like, I don't have time to edit this. And then I was like, all right, let's do another one. And then I did another one and I was like, I'm going to put this out. And then I was like, no, it's season 6. It's the first episode. So I put this demand and this pressure of like what season 6 is going to be like. And it can't be the first one and it can't come out the gate like that. And it just didn't fit right. And so I said, I'm going to take a break. Between seasons, I might take a break. And that's okay. So I figured, hey, it's a 3-week break. I'm going to come back in fresh. Today I sat here and I was like, I'm going to script this out. I was like, no, I don't want to give you guys something script out. I want to talk to you about the future of podcasting, finding your niche, leaning into creativity, kind of where I came from, and things that I'm doing that will help you set up your structure of your podcast or maybe get unstuck on where you want to take your podcast. For me, it's the podcast in the rough. I created this on this journey and I started thinking about it and I was like, well, I love the name because I'm a big Aladdin fan, And I thought the podcast in the rough, well, what is it all really about? Well, it's about finding that diamond in the rough, right? That it's the podcast in the rough. This is the thing that I'm building that like it's, you look and you don't really notice anything. It's dull until you shine this thing up. And I'm shining this thing up so that it could become like the thing, the gem. And, what happens, right? Like what happens when you walk into like, say, the Cave of Wonders, right? There's all this stuff that's tempting stuff, right? There's history there. How did it get there, right? And you're in there and you're going to take something from this. So you kind of go in there and then you remove the one thing and then you got to go on this adventure, 1, to get there and then 2, to grab it and then get out of there, if you will, right? And I felt like that's what my career has been like. Like I went out and I did this thing and like it was scary and like all this adventure happened and I was tempted by all the wealth and the gold, right? And the knowledge and like the connections. And then there was always, everywhere you turn, there was like an evil doer, right? There was someone that was trying to sabotage what you're trying to do. And it's like cutthroat out there. There's a lot of blending of, poor and rich and middle class and all these things that I did in my career that I felt like the Podcast and Rough was the perfect fit, the perfect name for what I want to do. And I just happen to lean more into like, okay, we're going to talk about podcasting as the base, and then I'm going to, throw in some information and experiences. But I'm like, I don't want to get stuck there. I want to move away kind of from teaching podcasting on here because I've done, a lot of seasons here about that. And now I have my mastermind. By the way, if you want to check that out, you can do so by going to thepodcastandrough.com/learn. And it's the Podcast Success Secrets Mastermind. And so now inside my mastermind, I've dedicated all of that. That's where I put all the information of teaching podcasting. But I do still share some stuff on this because that's where I started, right? Like for the reboot of season 3. So I bring this up because maybe you're thinking, okay, I have this podcast. I've been doing the same thing, right? Over and over again. What do I do? Maybe first of all, the biggest thing is maybe you haven't broken your podcast up into seasons. I'm telling you right there is one of the fastest way to really organize your podcast and give yourself some, more direction and take breaks and also have ability to pivot from here and there. It's just simply breaking up your podcast into seasons. And I didn't start doing that at first. I was just recording over and over again. Literally look at it and be like, okay, maybe season 1 or 2 or 3 or whatever you're on, it's only going to be 10 episodes, 5 episodes, 20 episodes. And then at that number, you're going to wrap it up and you're going to switch subjects. But not so extreme that your listener base is like, oh, I'm not into this subject. You lean into what everyone is kind of gravitating towards and what your niche is. And you can go extreme with the niche or you can leave it a little more open, but you definitely got to find your niche. And that's what I've done. My niche is about sharing my hero's journey, my stories of entrepreneurship, my trials and tribulations, the things I think about with tech and stuff like that, and my creative flow, ultimately my creativity, right? Like how to take something to another level and be creative with it. And so that's what I've done with podcasting. And I've really simplified my podcast to a point. I mean, like the setup and how I edit and all this stuff. And I've really got it down to now I can do this and it doesn't take all day. But then I was thinking the other day, okay, I'm going to be talking about in my season 6 some more entrepreneurship and some of the stories. I find that exciting because I can talk about those things and I can share multitude of experiences and trials and tribulations. I want to say it in a way because obviously a lot of you guys know I'm really big on mental health. And I've been taking time for myself for a while now and getting professional help to really just have more, I wouldn't even say control over my mind, but understanding of my mind. And give my mind a break and build a set of tools so that I can handle the world and trials and tribulations and the demand within my businesses and my personal life. And it's been amazing, and I'm still learning, and I'm a student to this, and I feel like I'll always be a student to this, but it's really just self-mastery. And I'm nowhere near self-mastery. I'm actually at the very beginning of just balance, finding balance and figuring it out. And I bring that up because podcasting is a place where you can go to vent, to build, to grow, to expand, to learn, to share, to educate, all that good stuff. Think of your podcasting as your getaway. And once you identify it that way and you see it that way, when you sit down in front of this microphone and you focus on these things, you're going to be like, I could do this. I'm speaking to someone that needs to hear this. This is the safe zone, right? It's a good place, in my opinion, to be if you want to kind of have a little bit of your foot in the water of social media. I don't think social media is a good place to be if you're trying to work on yourself. It can be if you have a support system and you have a community built, a following. But if you don't have that and you've been struggling with that, then it's not a really good place to start. And I think podcasting is that place. And it doesn't have to, your podcast don't have to go into Instagram, TikTok, or Facebook. It can strictly just stay on the podcasting platforms. And that's fine. And focus on that and grow that. So when we're talking about what podcasting looks like for you and for the future, I want you to really think about, finding your niche, what community you want to build, what type of people do you want to reach, who's your ideal avatar, right? What subjects are you going to talk about? And a couple of weeks ago, I was sitting there and I was watching some behind the scenes of some films because I'm moving more into, making full-length movies. And I'm excited about that, building on my cinema rigs and things like that. Obsessing over cameras, find myself really going down the rabbit hole of why this camera, why this lens, this sensor, like all these different things. I'm like, this is really cool. And then I was like, just last week, it was like, man, I can't wait for this because I'm going to have so much fun. I'm so excited about it. And set building, I want to build the sets. I get to build these big, giant movie sets. That's what I'm going to do. And I'm going to start off like I did everything else. I'm going to start off grinding. It's going to be just me. And then I'm going to bring on the right people and build a team. And it's going to be great. But I want to have the experience. And that made me think about starting another podcast. And it also made me think about, well, why don't I just put that on the podcast in the rough? I'll just put whatever I'm going to talk about on this podcast. And I felt it just needed its own space. So if you're considering having another podcast or you have a partner, really look at like, can this new person, maybe you have a new co-host that's coming in and you don't have a podcast set up that way. Can you both bring that energy into the current podcast? Does it mesh? Does it fit? Will it be the great future? Or do you need to start a separate something? And just know this, the risk of setting up a separate something with someone else or starting two podcasts that you run, you could run yourself thin. You could also give more energy to one and step away from the other, and the other one doesn't go anywhere. Now, that just might mean that you're falling in place of where you really need to be. But if you're like me, like I really, really enjoy the podcast in the rough, and I don't want to get away from it, then that makes the decision of creating other podcasts a little challenging and a little risky because I'm like, I'm going to give my energy over here, but I don't want to lose it here. For the longest time, ever since I started ZT Films, I've been thinking about, how do I blend Zebulon Thomas and ZT Films together? It might sound so weird because it's just me, but, one side of me is all about, spiritual awakening and coaching and entrepreneurship, and the other one's about creativity, filmmaking, fun, geeking out on things, and it's my professional business. I do have a professional business side on the Zebulon Thomas coaching, but nothing like ZT Films. One just took off. And I can't seem to bring them together. And that's why the podcast wouldn't even work. And plus, I want to attract more filmmakers. That's where it comes down to, is finding your niche. So my niche for my other podcast is going to be filmmakers, editors, storytellers, anyone who works on sets of movies or wants to, plays with video cameras. It could be content creators, but mostly filmmakers. And it's going to be me talking about all the things that happened in the past on these sets and how we got it done and how I started. And then beyond that, like as I move forward, like what kind of camera gear I'm using, what's going on in this particular movie that I'm working on. And so it's a very easy thing to talk about. The only difference is that has to be video. I want it to be video. So it's a video podcast. It'll be audio, but mainly video podcast. And so there's more editing. I'm like, well, how do I edit that? So I'm setting that whole setup with the new podcast is I'm going to take a few weeks and I'm going to dial it in. I don't have to, but I'm going to dial it in. And what that looks like is, okay, I have the good cameras to record podcasting. I'm just using, some nice webcams that really look good. I don't need to go too crazy, but the quality does have to look good, especially if I'm a filmmaker. And then I'm like, well, let me give it a really cinematic filmmaker approach and just maybe set the mood and angle the cameras in a way where it doesn't look like a podcast, looks more like a movie. And that's what I'm thinking about. I'm toying with this idea. I might. A lot of people have some really amazing setups. They look so good. And then there's the typical, everyone has that setup, right? You know what I'm talking about. And then I'm like, well, let's not go too crazy and get stuck, because I always tell everyone about this. Don't get stuck behind creating and never doing, like never, thriving and never arriving. Make sure that if you're going to set it up, set a time limit, set, the goal, and then go, okay, this is record time. If it's not ready, we're still going. And so I'm going to fail forward, but I want to make it look good. And I'm not going to have any editing, because I'm going to do this in a way that it's just a very natural flow. It's going to be maybe long form. If anything, it's gathering the material, the footage I'm going to be talking about, and I'll be recording this live, if you will. And I'll be talking about some of the scenes, and that's all being edited per se in real time. So that way when I'm done, I don't have to do any editing. That's the only way I could pull this off, because my workload is so intense with all the other things and clients that I currently have and do that I would not have time for that. But I want to get it done because I need to put it out there. And it's also probably not going to be a weekly thing. It'll probably be bi-weekly. And that's okay too. Slow grow. But something like that might be so solid that people really enjoy. And it might grow faster than what I'm doing now. So these are some things that you might want to think about. I currently have a second podcast, but which becomes my third podcast. But I'm doing that with a friend from New York that I've met over the past couple months, almost a year now. And we've been building episodes, and we haven't been releasing them. We've had guest interviews. We've had all types of great episodes, but we've been building this out because we were trying to figure out how does it look? What does it look like? How does it fit into our schedules? And it's actually really fun. And we're about to hit the go on that. Like, it's been months, and we're finally about to hit like go time. It's up. There it is. And there's some stress there because we're like, once we make this public, now we're committed. We need to make sure our times line up so we can keep these episodes going. And we've pre-recorded a whole bunch of episodes, but we know how fast that can go. If you think that you have 10, 15 episodes thrown up front and you're going to release that every week or even bi-weekly, it'll still creep up on you if you're not still recording, if you're not continuously building content. Use those pre-recorded episodes, at least we are in our case, to really get ahead of it so that every time we release one, we've done one or two already. And so it just keeps building. It only gets tricky when they're time sensitive. Season changes, economic changes, news changes, trending changes, like anything we might have talked about that could be old news tomorrow. If we wait too long, those don't fit in, it doesn't work. So we have to be careful with that. But other than that, you can totally build it out, and you can set this up in a way where, you're not as stressed if you miss an episode. It's hard when you have two people working on something, especially with us in two different, states, and we have completely different lives. We're doing different things. And we try to find the middle ground to record our episodes. But it's a lot of fun. It is a lot of fun when we do it. And it wasn't until even just yesterday, I just edited a whole bunch of the final episodes that we recorded that gets me caught up on the editing side of things, because we were just recording them and dumping them into a drive, right? And I was like, I'll get to them. And I finally got to them. And now that I look at them and I got to watch them all, I was like, we got this is gold. This is really, really good here. And I see so much potential. And here's what I think, in my opinion. I'd have to ask my co-host at some point what he thinks. The joint podcast gives me a new approach to filtering out some of the content that I would put on here that maybe doesn't fit. And it gives me an outlet to say, hey, that goes good there. I can live limitless in a way on the other podcast and be without restrictions or boundaries. And I set those boundaries for myself on this podcast. This podcast, I've said there's things I'm not going to talk about, things I will talk about, things that don't fit on this. But that's there so that I don't get too far off track. And that's also there because I want to respect my listeners and say, you subscribed. I've earned your subscription to listen to this podcast episode every Friday. You set aside some time and you tune in, or you do it while you're in your commute, and you listen because this hits the niche that you're into. This hits that subject. If I get too crazy left or right, I'm going to lose you. It's not worth your time. And so I have these restrictions and boundaries. Where with the other podcast, with both of us coming together, we can share a slew of things that is a very open market, if you will. There's no real niche there, but it's something that a lot of people will go, oh, dude, I'm tuning into that. And then you want to subscribe because you don't want to miss something that you could really benefit from. So that's kind of how that thing works. And we're still learning and growing. And it's not perfect, but that's the crazy thing. It's like we're not pulling out all the bells and whistles to make this thing sound good or look good. We're just doing it. And it's turned out really good. So it's some things I want you to think about. And this is stuff I'm sharing with you in the first episode of season 6 here, to let you know that I want you to figure out how you could take your podcast to the next level. And if that's something you're interested in, that's what we're going to talk about. But it's not just podcasting. Don't think that, we're just going to be stuck on podcasting. There's a lot of other things I want to share with you in this season. And we're going to be talking a little bit more about, the journey, what your hero's journey looks like, what you went through to get to where you are now, what the next level looks like for you, what your creative brain might need to lean more into, your mental health, right? Like how to do the things you want to do and still make sure that you're taking time for you and you're not burning out or overdoing it. Setting those boundaries, right? Like even the things that I've learned just in the past year, I'm like, man, if I just had boundaries in place with my creativity, things would have been a lot easier, not as crazy and destructive, right? Be more constructive. And so I'm like, all right, let's set these boundaries. Let's use the tools I have so that I can structure myself, my life, and the things that I do and the people I'm surrounded by, so that everything flows and I can be more creative. Because that's ultimately what I want. I want to know what you want. Ultimately, I want to live in abundance and flowing and just be creative, almost like I was when I was a kid. I want to be able to do all the things I want to do, have fun, not take things too crazy seriously, not get stressed out over stuff, and just go, listen, we've got this. And I think over time, that's something you'll learn, right? Like I had to go through many years of my life, before I can actually say, hey, you know what? And realize that I usually always find a way. Everything usually does work out if you just keep pushing forward. And I wish I wouldn't have stressed it so hard when I was going through those moments, but I didn't know. And so now things go on and I'm like, hey, you know what? It's fine. And I think that's how you find that balance where you're like, it's going to be okay. We're going to work it out. That sucks. That's the other thing. Learning that sometimes things are just going to suck. It's not going to be good. It's just going to suck. And you'll get through it and you'll push past it. You'll find a way. But to sit there and say that I'm not going to feel this way, or my life is going to be turning out amazing, and my podcast is going to be good, my business is going to be good, and we're going to be happy all the time, and we're going to spend all this money, that's false. Like, listen, if you're making a lot of money, something in your life is missing out. Like, something's not getting your attention. If it's getting your attention, maybe you're not making the money. If you're making the money and your life is getting, like, your relationships are getting the attention they deserve, then maybe you don't have the time for yourself. You haven't been taking that time. You have to find the balance, but it's never always on point. And you're not going to be like, listen, I told myself that too. Oh, I'm going to become rich and I'm not going to have any of these problems. I'm not going to think this way. I'm going to be happy all the time. Well, let me tell you, that's not true. You're going to become rich and you're going to realize you have way more responsibilities and you have way more things or more options, right? More decisions you have to make, more stress you have to worry about because you're trying to maybe protect yourself or distance yourself from things. And it just becomes a big problem. So listen, the bottom line is you got to work on you and you got to work on how you operate no matter where you're at, before, after the riches, whatever that is, before the big business, after the big business, in the middle of it, right? If things aren't working out perfectly, you got one microphone and it doesn't work right and you're still recording. How do you enjoy the process? How do you maintain and build the boundaries, the rituals, routines, and the responses that you're going to have to stimulus that serve you no matter what? And I'm learning to do that right now. And it's been amazing. It's been tough, but it's been eye-opening. And I just wish I would have learned this earlier. Sometimes you just need something to help you wake up a little bit and realize, oh, I need to work on me, or I need to fix this. I think the biggest thing is that's why I like podcasting. And I think that's why, and I'm bringing it back to podcasting because that's where we're at with it. Why do you listen to podcasts? Why are you listening to me right now? Because you want to get information. You want to see what's new. And I'll tell you what, when I did vlogging, I filmed every day of my life on YouTube for 3 years, and I did all these videos. I love looking back at it. I love going, wow, look at our lives. Like, I get to see my kids grow up in the video camera. I get to see me go through things in my video camera. I actually got to go back. I just started doing this at the right time too, right when I started ZT Films. I got to watch my business grow, and I can look back and go, oh my gosh, that was the video. That was the turning point. That behind the scenes, or that person I met in this video 5 years later became the thing that was the seed that was planted that made this thing functional, right? Like, there's so many little gems in there that I see when I look back at those videos in my career, and I go, that's where it started. And I never knew it would have. And I probably would have forgot it if I didn't record it. I would have forgot what was the key point that made all this happen. You might just think, oh, it's just the grind, staying consistent. So maybe you're not vlogging your life, but you're podcasting it. So I think about podcasting, oh, hey, you know what? I don't want to just look back at a bunch of episodes and teach people how to do podcasting. So I wanted to make them creative and interesting and exciting so I could look back and go, oh, that's a form of art. That's why I did when I was doing the screen thumbnails for YouTube, spent all this time on those creative images. Go back and look at my YouTube channel. If you go back into season 3 and 4 and 5, you'll see these really cool thumbnails that I spent hours on in Photoshop to make, and they tell a story in the image, right, that kind of fits with the episode. And sometimes I would go, like at the very beginning, I was doing like animations to the overlay of this podcast, of each episode. And that was exciting. It took even more time. And I had fun doing it, but then I got too busy. I got too busy with real work that I needed to get done, my career and the things I also have to do. And so I bring this up because I want you to start thinking about ways to next level your podcast, have fun with it, and maybe go in and say, I'm going to do a bunch of thumbnails and see what that looks like. If you're an artist, how can you throw your art into podcasting? What does that look like? And start thinking about these things and getting creative. And that's really what I want you to focus on now until the next episode. And I'd love it to get your feedback. So comment under this video if you're watching on YouTube, or under this podcast, or go to the website and send me a message at thepodcastingrough.com. And let's have the conversation. I'd love to talk about it. Even if you find this on Instagram, let's have a conversation in the chat. I would love to talk about what your podcast looks like. And then if you really want to get the tools and insights and deep dive with me and just have a really amazing experience, then head over to thepodcastingrough.com/learn and join the Podcast Success Secrets Mastermind. I promise you won't be disappointed. There's a lot of gems there, a lot of great things we're doing. And it's cool. And I'm building it over time. So you'll become my founding members, right? Anyone joining right now in this current time, you're my founding members, because eventually this thing's going to take off. At least that's the goal. And I don't even mean it's going to it's going to be the next big thing. But I'm saying it's going to take off to the point where we have more than 50, 60 members. And then it's not as personal, if you will. It's bigger. And so I'm excited for that. And so I want you to start thinking about the things you can do to make your podcast better, but not just better. What's the experience for your listeners? Is that changing your audio, making it better? Is that creating video podcasts so they can see something? Is it bringing them facts that they can take with them? Tools, entrepreneurship, creative ideas, or maybe it's just talking to them, sharing your life experiences so they feel like they're part of your life, your journey, and they can relate. What does that experience look like? Don't just create a podcast. What's the experience? What is it that you look back on and go, dang, look at that. Look how much we've grown. And I'm really excited about taking the podcast with my co-host into a live podcast, because I'm really obsessed with radio in a way right now. And I've always been, but more so now that I have a co-host, because now we have a team. And I want to see what that looks like. I'm excited about my new podcast with ZT Films. I don't know what I'm going to call it yet, but it's going to be about filmmaking and behind the scenes. And I'm really going to, I know I'm going to be proud of that. I'm going to be really proud of that. And then the podcast on Rough, I'm still figuring it out, but we're moving through it. We're going and sharing ideas, and I get to speak with you and just kind of get creative here and have a good time and give you an experience of an adventure. Right? I was going to get into storytelling in this season, and I may not. I don't know. I really got stuck on the narration. Right? I was really stuck on that. I wrote out this whole story of, it was really good, because there was an episode I didn't release. It was talking about this, or what season 6 was going to be. And I wrote this whole story about how I was going to take over social media by using the Infinity Glove, right? And, because I was watching some Avengers, and I was like, oh man, I really love this with Thanos. And I was like, man, what would be, how do I build that into a story? And I did write this out. It's incredible. And once I figure out how to narrate this thing so it doesn't sound cheesy and it feels comfortable for me to narrate, then I'll do it. And what's nice is it's a story. It's sharing my backstory. It's also giving you tips and tools and strategies. And it's putting a twist on social media, as if when you're listening to this from the beginning to the end, it'll take you on this journey to where you actually could gather all these, stones, if you will, and take over social media. That's the goal for this, but I got to figure out how to narrate it. So stay tuned. I'll share with that soon. I'll share that with you very soon. I'm not sure when, but maybe it's coming in season 6. I don't know. Like I said, I got to figure out how to narrate it. I've been studying that too. So listen, feed your brain, feed your mind as much as you can. Read books, listen to audio, learn, and spend more time learning and teaching yourself something new than to hear about things on social media and that mess of false information and people who think they know something that's completely not legit and it doesn't serve you. The gossip. Spend more time learning the thing that actually is real, or that does work, or that has a potential to work, and less of the chaos and dumb stuff. I call it just senseless, stupid stuff that I feel like social media is 95% senseless stuff just for views and clicks, and it is entertainment, but is it the entertainment you really want? Like, I like a good laugh. There's some stuff on there that is really dumb, but I'm like laughing at it. I'm like, this is actually pretty funny. Or like, why did this person wipe out on their bicycle? But I was like, one, this is funny. because they didn't get hurt. I'm not laughing at someone getting hurt, but I'm saying like everyone's laughing like this is great because they're sharing a moment. And the moment is, I relate to that because I did the same dumb stuff when I was a kid. And that's why I was like, man, I'm laughing at that. I know what that's like, right? And that's cool. And that's entertainment. But there's a lot of stuff on there. So what's the point? Listen, I've gone long enough here in this episode. Thank you so much for tuning in. Be sure to tune in next week for another great episode of the Podcast in Rough. I will talk to you next week. Take care. This is the Podcast in the Rough.